Hi, when was the first animation? You might be thinking it was whenever Walt Disney invented Mickey Mouse, but honestly, Disney Studios came up with Trolley Troubles 1927, which introduced us to Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. So it's Oswald, right? Well, not really. Animation, as you're probably thinking about it, goes back about a decade before that. And animation, as you're probably not, goes back a little further. Alright, first we're going to have to define what animation is. According to Urban Dictionary, animation is 1. A series of stills or frames played in a series to give what is best described as the illusion of movement. 2. Movement of any kind. Now that first definition, it's actually not too bad. I mean, it uses the word series twice and technically defines all movies, but it's a good starting point. That second part sucks. We're going to skip it. Movement of any kind includes all movement, so we're ruling that out. For the purposes of this video and this channel, I'm going to tweak that first definition slightly and work from there. A series of drawings and stills that, when shown in rapid succession and in a sequence, creates the illusion of movement. The drawings and stills are still known as frames, but that's no longer part of the actual written definition. Animations have to be played in the right sequence, otherwise they just don't look right. If you take any one of these drawings and put them out of order, then the entire motion is broken. Now that defines animation, but what we're looking for today is specifically the birth of modern animation. So I'm going to add one more qualifier to this, even though it's not technically part of the definition. The animation needs to have one character who is named in their own animation. You're going to see animations in this video where it's literally just a rat running along a wall. You're also going to see paintings of characters with stories and ambitions. The animation will have the motion that we're looking for, but they won't have the story. And on the flip side, the paintings will have the story and the characters. It'll meet the qualifier, but it won't meet the definition. We are looking for when these two collide. What was that first piece that perfectly combined them? When did it come out? And who made it? To answer that, I think we gotta go back. Back in caveman times, they would paint on walls, specifically cave walls in France. They would then illuminate these paintings one at a time using the most cutting-edge technology of their day: fire. I want my deposit back when I leave, so I can't paint on the walls. What I can do is have you just pretend that these are cave paintings. Here, I'll do some post-processing effects. There you go. So, what they would do is they would have the same drawing multiple times in a row. Then, with the fire, they would illuminate one drawing at a time. Waving the torch back and forth between the drawings would create the illusion of motion. And then all of a sudden, you have a jaguar running on the wall. 2,000 years later, people learned to paint on columns. Those people are Egyptians, and the paintings are hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics were incredibly important to the Egyptians. Religious leaders would use them to teach their stories to the illiterate masses, and governments would use them to keep track of their logistics. But for us, they're important because this is sequential art. Art that tells a story as you put them side by side. And this is the next step. Once you get past cave paintings, you want to tell a longer story. Now we have a problem where there's not as much motion, but it's a step in the right direction. And this is also the beginning of sequential art, which we see all over the world. The Greeks put them on their pots and on their buildings. The Romans built this friggin' thing. This is Trajan's column, and it's basically a comic book about how Trajan is awesome. After that, everyone falls asleep. And then they wake up. It's 1440 and Johannes Printing Press has just invented the printing press. It just became a lot easier to make the same art twice. First people to jump on this? The Catholics. They print comic book versions of the Bible, which they distribute in church to their illiterate masses. It teaches the 1440 version of the Bible, and I'm not gonna lie, the art kinda goes hard. In the 17th century, in a move that Bob Ross would have called a mistake, somebody invents politics. This creates a need for political cartoons, and these political cartoons often had multiple scenes and panels, which make them sequential art. But I don't like politics. Politics bore me. So, we're going to talk about William Hogarth. William Hogarth, in 1732 and 1734, created 8 prints that tell the story of Tom Rockwell. Spoiler alert for the 8-print series, A Rake's Progress. Tom is rich, Then he spends all his money and goes insane. Actually, that's not quite fair. There's a lot going on in these 8 prints. To do that, we're going to talk about just the one of them. One quick note, these are prints. These are paintings. Somebody took this print and painted over it. We're going to take a look at the Heir, which is the first of the 8 prints. This is Tom Rockwell. His dad just died, and you can tell because his servants are crying in the corner. And he's getting fitted for a new suit. While he does this, he's rejecting the marriage of his pregnant fiancée, Sarah Young. Sarah's mother is clutching the love letters that Tom wrote to her, and Sarah's holding the ring. He pays off Sarah, but Sarah still loves Tom. Behind him, the administrator of the estate is stealing a coin from Tom's purse because his father is a cheapskate. How do we know his father is more money-grubbing than Mr. Krabs? He has a painting of himself counting money above his fireplace. There is money coming out of his walls when they try and hang the mourning drapes. The Jack and Spit, a symbol of hospitality, has been locked up. Their coat of arms is just 3 vices with the word beware written below it. There's no ash in the fireplace, which means he never buys wood for the servants. In order to reupholster his shoe, he cut out the cover of the Bible. Quick note, you can't see that in the painting, but you can in the print. And most importantly, cat food is too expensive, so his cat is literally starving. For context, here's what happens when I light up all the highlighted parts, all of the parts of this canvas that are showing important information. Here's what happens when I take all of those and I put them on top of each other. Blip. This is just the first print, and it's already set up more drama than a Netflix show. I was going to talk about all 8 prints here, but when I sat down and started, I realized quickly that there's no way I could do that and not have the video just be about this. So let's bring it back to animation. What makes this not animation? And that is the fact that there's no actual motion. There's eye flow, which is where your eye is moving on the canvas. That's called the eye contact point. And it's kind of important later, but we'll talk about that later, don't worry. There's movement in the way your eye moves around the canvas, but that's not really what we're talking about when we say the illusion of movement. At least at the start, the trick to making animation work was to have the eye focused on one specific place. In 1825, John Thermotrope invents the thermotrope. Post-edit Russell here, I keep saying thermotrope, it's thaumatrope. Alright, now that that's in the video, I'm going to go back to saying thermotrope. It's this little toy. On one side you have a drawing, and on the other side you have another drawing. Pretty simple. What you do is you take your piece of paper and you put string through them. Once you have it in there, you twirl it up. And I hope that's shown. So it turns out making the thermotrope is pretty easy. Recording it is harder. So here's a bunch of other people who did it right. We're not quite there yet, but we are giving people ideas. I'm talking about the phenatinoscope. I'm talking about the phenakiscoscope. I'm talking about the phenatiscoscope. I'm talking about the phenatits. I love you too. Phenakistoscope. And the Trotoscope. And the Proxinoscope. All these tools allow animators to make 8 to 12 frame animations. They use a series of spins and slides to move the animation, and then a series of slits and mirrors to project the animation through a viewfinder. This isn't official or anything, but that's why I refer to this time period as the 12 frame time.
Hey, that's the name of the show.
The most recent version of this is the Zoetrope. Invented in 1868 by James Clark Zoetrope, this was an improvement on the Proxinoscope because of its concave mirror. It cut down on the actual distortion as the animation was being spun. All of these devices have one principle in common, and that's that the more frames you have, the longer your animation will be. Let's say your movie is running at 24 frames a second, and you have one drawing per frame. You have to do 24 drawings to get 1 second of movie. This principle applies to everything, even when it's just down to 12 frames. An animation that is 12 frames long will be longer than an animation that is 8. If you ever wanted to make an animation that had more than 12 frames, your only option was a kinescope. Most modern kinescopes are drawn in high school textbooks and are wildly inappropriate for YouTube's terms of services.
Oh, look! An Eddie drawing! And another! That ain't me!
Seems Sarah would like to pursue a career in animation.
What a loser! Oh, look! Eddie is a smart.
Another name for a kinescope is just a flipbook, and it's going to form the basis of all animation that follows it. The idea goes like this. You take multiple sheets of paper and put them together with a binder clip. You start on the last page, and then you move one page before it, and a page before it, and a page before that. Each time, you make the same drawing, but moved ever so slightly. Then, when you're done, you flip through the book, and you can see your final animation. In 1876, your best option if you want to animate something is probably the kinescope. The flipbook is versatile, it gives you the most amount of options, but it's still not perfect. You can't actually project it to an audience. There's just no way to do that yet. So only one person is allowed to look at your animation at a time, which is really the main thing that's holding animation back, is that accessibility. Only one person can view the art. And while today animation might be an incredibly lucrative market, at that time, nobody was willing to spend their entire life savings on an animation that they really couldn't show anybody. That was until... Hey guys, this is Russell from the far future, doing research for the 5th video right now, and I came across something a little troubling. In 1885, a French scientist named Atan Jules Murray created an animation called Laham's Machine. This was quite possibly the world's first projected animation. He was trying to make a character walk. He was trying to do a walk cycle, and at the time, nobody was able to do that in a way that it was presented smoothly. That one's all well and good. No problems there. It is an animation, but it's not a named character. I still felt the need to add this addendum to put it in here. While doing research for this addendum, though, I came across something a little bit tougher to ignore. In 1892, a man named Charles Emile Renaud created his own proxinoscope, his own home theater. He called it the Théâtre Optique. He hand-painted every frame of his animations, which give him this really vibrant color. These ones that you're seeing here are all repainted, so you can't really see what it was really like, but they did, from all accounts, have a lot of color to them. His projector was never strong enough to project to a full theater of people, so he had to bring people into his home residence and show them there. Over time, he showed over 500,000 people this animation, which he was calling Pantomimes Luminous. Now, at the time, he didn't have a good way to combine the background and the animation that he was working on. Painting every single background onto the animation would be A, tedious, and B, probably look like crap. If the background is casually moving the whole time, then it's not gonna look good. Instead, what he did was he had two separate projectors. One that would project just the background, and another that would project the animation. This made it even harder to show people because now he needs two projectors that need to be completely synced up with each other. That said, it did create the illusion that he was looking for. He would make three creations: Pauvre Perrault, Un Bon Boc, and Les Clowns et Chants. Only Pauvre Perrault still exists today, the other two became lost films. He would expand on it 2 years later with A Tour d'une Cabine and A Ray de Coin de Feu. Yeah, I think I got that right.
Un rêve au coin du feu.
So here's my dilemma. By my own standards, Pauvre Perrault fits my definition of the first animation. And it comes out a full 20 years before what I actually wanted the first animation to be. Perrault is a named character, and the animation is an animation. It's a series of pictures that creates motion. That it fits my definition. I created this entire video thinking that the first animation wasn't going to be for another 20 years, and I built on that fact in future videos. I'm still going to stand by the claim I make later in the video, but I didn't think it was right to just completely omit this. My one saving grace is the fact that the animation that I mentioned later in the video is going to be shown to a theater of people and then a wider audience past that. Whereas this is literally some guy in his attic just inviting strangers up to see his new invention. Now I'm going to continue the rest of this video as if this addendum didn't happen, but I really wanted to make sure that this was out there. One more, less damaging piece of information is that in 1895, George Méliès began experimenting with special effects in his own movies. As a matter of fact, he ended up revolutionizing a lot of special effects and creating some things that are almost animation. I wouldn't say these are the animations because they're a much smaller part of a much larger picture, but yeah, no, that's animation. He also invented an editing technique known as the stop trick, which is basically just a jump cut where something was moved. It's also been argued that this stop trick is what went on to inspire some stop motion artists. In 1892, Tommy Projector invents the projector. April 6, 1906, John Stuart Blackton makes the animation Humorous Faces of Funny Faces. This isn't a massive hit by any stretch, it's more just experimenting what could be done. So now we have a way to project animation. Fantastic. How do we show it to the masses? AMC won't be invented for another 14 years. Movies are very much in their infancy right now. And animations are maybe only a couple minutes long. It's a lot of hard work, and at the time, there's not a lot of payoff for it. So, how do you show your cartoons to the unwashed masses? At that time, vaudeville was at its peak. Musicians, magicians, acrobats, comedians, they would all come on stage, they would entertain a show, and then they would leave. And it was a variety, so you'd have a couple of acrobats and then some comedians. This was kind of the perfect environment for an aspiring animator. It was a niche market, nobody really heard of it. The actual animation that you wanted to show off was usually no more than a few minutes, so it fit right in vaudeville. A man sits at his counter for breakfast. He looks down at his son, who hands him a flip book. He takes a look at the flip book, and after pondering it for a couple of seconds, he thinks, I could do that. This man's name is Winsor McCay, and that flip book would go on to be Little Nemo. The reception's pretty good, people seem to generally enjoy it, but it's still just a niche little thing. It's nothing too major. Winsor McCay goes home, follows it up a year later with How a Mosquito Operates. So now you've got these two animations, both made by Winsor McCay. Now the first one has a seriously long live action component to it, whereas How a Mosquito Operates is pure animation from start to finish. Majority of the early animations would mix live action with animation because the animation itself was so hard to do. Little Nemo was a giant step forward because of how much animation was in it, and How a Mosquito Operates was a giant step forward because it is just solid animation. I think there's one more factor that doesn't quite fit into the definition as we have it, and that's character. It isn't until we give the characters names and personalities that we actually have the start of animation as we know it. With that in mind, Winsor McCay goes back to his office, sits down, and works for another 2 years. Just a quick little warning here, this next animation has dead bugs in it. It's nothing too graphic, but just to be safe, here's the time code if you want to skip it. Back in Russia, Ladis Istarvich is experimenting with a new form of animation. He realized that the same way they were flipping through drawings in America, you could also flip through pictures. You take a picture, move a little, take another picture, move a little, and so on and so forth. He then applied this to dioramas. At that time, miniature sets were not a thing at all. So he had to construct all of his own materials, and the hardest of these by far was the model. You needed something that could bend and move and then keep its rigid form, like dried dead bugs. With this new method, he creates The Ant and the Grasshopper in 1911, and then The Cameraman's Revenge in 1912. This may seem weird and gross to us today, but without this, you don't have A Nightmare Before Christmas, you don't have anything made by Leica, and you don't have Fantastic Mr. Fox. Let's go back to America. February 18th, 1914. You're at the Palace Theater in Chicago. Now at this time, vaudeville acts, they would have the animator stand on stage next to their animation as it was playing. And sometimes they'd come up, tell jokes, they'd talk about the process a little bit, and Winsor McCay was no exception. He goes up and tells a few jokes before showing how a mosquito operates, and it's mildly successful. Everyone seems to generally enjoy themselves. The applause dies down and Winsor McCay steps back on stage, this time with a top hat and a whip. He explains to the audience how much painstaking work goes into this process. Drawing every individual frame over and over, and if you mess any part of the drawing up, throw that entire frame away and start over. It's a nightmare, this process. And with that, Winsor steps to the right and introduces the only dinosaur in captivity. He would encourage her to come out from behind the cave, and she would actually acting. She would act sheepish and shy, and she would come out slowly. She doesn't just, oh, there she is. She slowly saunters out. He would do these tricks where he would take a wooden apple and he would throw the apple behind the screen, and then a cartoon apple would appear that Gertie would then catch. For his grand finale, Winsor walks behind the screen himself and appears in the animation. An animated version of Winsor is picked up by Gertie and then takes the final bow from Gertie's back. This cartoon went on for 14 minutes, and it's the first time an animated cartoon character was given a name. Gertie the Dinosaur. And there we have it. What was the first art piece that combined animation and storytelling? Gertie the Dinosaur. When did it come out? February 18th, 1914. And who made it? Winsor McCay. Gertie was beloved by audiences, and they all wanted more, but there was a problem. Winsor had a full-time job already. He was an illustrator at the New York American, a newspaper owned by William Randolph Hearst. When Hearst found out that Winsor had been spending his company time working on these animations, he banned reviews of Winsor's show from showing up in the papers. He refused to run paid advertisements from the Victoria Theater, which is where McCay performed when he was in New York, and all new artists under his employ were no longer allowed to perform in vaudeville. McCay signed his contract before this new rule was put in place, but it was clear that the boss was gunning for him. Eventually, Winsor had to sign a new contract with Hearst that stopped him from performing anywhere outside of the greater New York area. This wasn't exactly the end of his animation career, as we'll see another example of it in a later video, but this was an end to his vaudeville career at least. The new contract that Winsor had to sign was pretty much the end of his vaudeville career. That doesn't mean that animation stops. Actually, far from it. People really wanted to see more of it. So, how it evolves past this point is kind of interesting, and I want to cover that in further videos. I have here a list of every single movie, TV show, short, anything that pushed animation forward. I have it on this list, and my original idea was to go through this entire list in one video. That's asinine. I'm not doing that. We're gonna do this in much shorter segments. So, hopefully you'll join me. If not, I hope you enjoyed this one. Take it easy.